Sacred Heart is proud to sponsor Pensacola Histories in recognition of the Daughters of Charity who brought their mission of care to Pensacola over 90 years ago.
Hello and welcome to our continuing story of Pensacola, North America's first place city. And in this series right now, we're talking about the evolution of county government. And in the past two episodes, we talked about how the early commissioners were appointed, how Andrew Jackson divided Florida into two counties, and how then the county government began to evolve, even though the initial responsibilities of the commissioners were roads, bridges, and ferries. And to begin with, there were practically none of them, and we wouldn't deal a whole lot with roads, bridges, and ferries until well into the 19th century. We talked in the latter two episodes about the fact that railroads were attempted here, that the county government became involved with them, was involved to a modest degree with the building of the Navy Yard, and then with the companion forts which defended the Navy Yard. How the commissioners were involved, of course, when the state legislature decided to determine whether we would proceed and become a state. Well, when I said state legislature, that's wrong. The territorial legislature decided we'd take action to become a state, which we did in 1845. And of course, we then followed the lack of detail, but the story of the commission through the 1850s, when basically the entire fabric of politics in the entire country was beginning to fall apart. Now we come to the end of the war between the states. We have to recognize again two particular things. Number one, from the beginning, the county operated without a formal charter or document which was to direct how the commissioners were to act. And secondly, the original county which went from the western border to the Suwannee River, was quickly altered because other counties were formed. So the closest one to us, of course, was Santa Rosa County, and that came into being in 1842. But others like Gadsden County came into place even earlier than that, so that the broad responsibilities that the commissioners had at the beginning shrunk, and basically the job became that much easier. Well, at the end of the war between the states, here's where things stood. Number one, the old government house, which had been the headquarters for city and county government, had burned during the war. And as a result of that, the county and the city, they're both legislative bodies, decided that it was not practical to try and build new quarters. And so each one rented quarters. The city rented a set of offices up on top of a meat market on South Palafox Street. The county commission rented 3 stores on East Government Street, these buildings belonging to the Pfeiffer family. And things went along very nicely with that. The arrangement was good. The people didn't object to it too much. But then, of course, we come to the early part of the 1870s, when, for reasons I don't know, maybe it was the times that the area was becoming more prosperous with the coming of lumbering and fishing and so on. Perhaps it was that. But in any event, the Pfeiffer family raised the rent. And when that happened, it became a public issue. And surprisingly enough, the voters were very angry. And they went to the county commissioners and petitioned that something be done. This was just terrible. And so basically the county commission said, okay, we have never done this. We have never had a referendum of any kind in Escambia County, but now we'll let you make the choice. If you want to add another mill to your ad valorem tax bill, fine. We'll take that money and we'll put it in escrow over here, and when there's enough there, we will build a county courthouse. And the people, the property owners of the county said, yes, we will do that. And as a consequence, they went forward, and that tax was enacted. And it took 10 years before they had enough money to do it. But in the year 1845, the new courthouse was built, and it was a fixture downtown for the next 55 years. Now, as we enter the 1870s, things are beginning to happen, largely because the new industries had come here, and with the industries there was prosperity. The more workers were required for work in the forests, and the new lumber mills, on the fishing fleets, and consequently there was a great need for building new houses. We have had, as we told in another episode, it was then that we began to establish new banks and savings and loan organizations. And at this point in time, the county commission was beginning to be more active too in things other than roads, bridges, and ferries. Now, the commission, elected in 1870, included these names. One was A.V. Carroll, second was A.J. Putnam, a third was C.M. Pierce. And all three of these men would have long records in public service. The fourth man was Elijah Zubalon. Now, Elijah deserves special mention. Elijah was a slave, pre-war was a slave. He somehow or other found himself in the employ of the federal officials who were here, who taught him to read and write. And when the war was over, he was a very ambitious man, opened a small business, was successful, was elected first as a city councilman, and then became a county commissioner, and a little bit later even sat one term in the or in the state legislature. So Zubalon Elijah was the first African American that we have here who held public office, and certainly he deserves to be mentioned. Now, as we move into the 1870s, county government now begins to move into a new area. First of all, this is caused by the fact that we have a great many veterans here now who had been injured or were disabled in some way. And secondly, we have a growing number of war widows. And these cases are coming before the county commission, and who at that point in time had no mechanism whatsoever to help. And so basically, even though they were still paying most of their bills in scrip, not money, but scrip, the commissioners said, all right, we've got to do something. We've got to take care of these people. So they voted to find ways of getting a hold of $20,000. And they selected some county-owned property on what is today West Leonard Street, and they built what was known as the Poor Farm. The Poor Farm was basically just exactly that, a place where the injured veteran could go, or where the war widow could go and be cared for. They called it a poor farm because that's what it was. They had all the acreage around there to raise the crops that they needed, and of course all the domestic animals that they required as well. Now, just a couple of years later, the area was beset with one of those periodic yellow fever epidemics, and there were more and more cases being shifted here off of commercial vessels. Men who are seamen who were coming in on commercial vessels that were sick. And the question is, what are we going to do with them? We have no public hospital. And so basically the commissioner said, all right, we've got a poor farm over here. Let's build another building just down the road to take care of infectious diseases that have no place else to go. And so they built what became known as the Pest House. Now, a little bit later on, I won't try to go into great detail on this, but you must recognize that the creation of the Poor Farm and then the Pest House was the first, that was the genesis of later work that led to what became known as the Women's Home, and then a little bit later on, of course, through another mechanism, to the creation here of the Escambia General Hospital. So all A led to B and B led to C, and these are new responsibilities, and there was nowhere in any document that said the county commission had to do this. They did what they did to meet a public need. Okay. As all of this material moved forward, we moved into the 1880s, and by now Escambia County is becoming a very prosperous area. We are doing extremely well in lumbering and in fishing, and as a result of this, more and more things are being asked of the county, because as the lumbering era proceeded, timber was being cut, and as the timber was cut, here was land where the stumps could be pulled, and you could now create good farming territory. And this is what people began to do. And now, as you create a farm economy out here, now people have to get back and forth. So they began to, farmers began to come to the commission saying, you're responsible for roads. Please, we want you to go ahead now and start building something out here for us over here in the west, or us up to the north of the city. And the county began to do this. Now, as you start to build the road, of course, you ultimately are going to, in one place or another, you're going to come in contact with a body of water, a river, a stream, and so forth. And the question is, okay, how do we get across? Once again, the commission was very, very savvy in these early days. They didn't rush out and build bridges and this sort of thing. They did it in another way. A typical case would be, let's say, that we've got a road going north, and we've come to 11 Mile Creek, and we need to cross over. And so the commissioners would call upon Farmer Jones out in that area, who obviously has done well. He's got a little money. And they say to Mr. Jones, sir, if you will build and maintain a bridge across 11 Mile Creek, you will have our authorization, and you may charge a toll for everyone who crosses over. So much for a man on foot, and so much more for a person on horseback, so much for every cow or every pig that goes across. And this is the way bridges and then ferries were constructed all across the county for basically the next 25 years. And it worked. The only responsibility basically that the county maintained is that they had to hold periodic hearings to be sure that the men and families that operated these utilities were charging a fair rate and that they were being properly maintained. And there were court cases that showed that in some cases they were not, but nonetheless this was a key part of what the county did. Now as we move a little bit forward, all through this story of the lumbering era, we begin to see railroading become a much larger part of county operations. In another episode, we've talked about how after the reestablishment of the Alabama-Florida Railroad in 1870, another very short line called the Pensacola and Perdido was built from downtown Pensacola over to Millview. And then in 1880, the L&N Railroad with some other affiliates built a line from Pensacola to the east, a line which linked up with another railroad coming west out of Jacksonville. And so the Pensacola and Atlantic Railroad came into being. Now, the importance about the railroads, of course, was this. Number one, they opened up whole new areas for settlement, for new opportunities, for people to want to utilize land. And secondly, the railroads became big taxpayers. So step by step through the 1880s, we begin to see the county becoming more active in more things, more operations, and of course the value of property becoming higher. And as the value of property became higher, it was possible to generate more taxes. Now, I don't want to give an improper figure there, idea here that the tax revenues suddenly just skyrocketed. They didn't, because by the time we get to the end of the 19th century, the total tax revenue from ad valorem taxes was only about $90,000. Now, the county got other money, of course, because they licensed certain operations. They licensed such things as bowling alleys and any place that serves spirituous liquors, things like that. They paid an annual fee, just as those within the city paid a fee, and that escalated it. But by the time we get into the early mid-1880s, another issue has come along that has generated a lot of money for the county, because it is in this period, once the original laws of the state are changed to take into consideration what had occurred during the Civil War. Now, of course, there was a question of who can vote. The African Americans who had been in slavery prior to that time, previously, of course, could not vote, but now they could. And now, what the county commissioners did, and this of course was something that was going into practice all across the South. They said, well, people should not vote unless they are able to read and write and understand certain things, and you must pay a price, a tax for the privilege of voting. And so everybody now began to pay a poll tax. And surprisingly, the amount of money collected annually for poll taxes made up a very substantial part of the total operating revenue of the county. But that's basically where that was moving. Now, in the course of all this, agriculture is beginning to change. As we clear more land, we have more farmers. We see a lot of people to the east of us here, in the counties, perhaps 100 miles to the east. They are beginning to make much more money than we are in agricultural here, because their land is hospitable to tobacco and cotton. Farmers who attempted those two products in Pensacola are having trouble. We didn't do well at all with cotton and tobacco. So the next step was, how do we scientifically attack this? Because now we have a growing number of leaders here who are very far-sighted. They are willing to underwrite things that will do something to help the economy grow. We don't have a Chamber of Commerce yet. We're about to get one. But as we move into the latter part of the 1880s, we begin to see farming, agriculture, economic development, all as a part of focus for what's going on in county government.